끝을 알아도 still I pretend 너를
Introducing Korean broadcast content that you won't be able to stop watching. For weary modern souls, Dr. Romantic, the quirky genius doctor of Puldam Hospital, prescribes heartwarming tales of humanity. A couple together for 7 years sees their rose-tinted glasses shatter. Can they keep their relationship alive? Discover the raw stories of youth, work, and love. Beyond what social media can show, experience the vibrant Korea through its hidden gems. Mama, the ultimate K-pop festival for global fans. Find your star in a feast of trendy music and electrifying performances. Now, the whole world enjoys it together.
The U.S. blockade of the Strait of Hormuz has taken effect as President Donald Trump claimed that Iran wants to make a peace deal very badly. Meanwhile, the Iranian president said that unreasonable demands from the U.S. blocked agreement during peace talks in Islamabad. In Europe, NATO allies have refused to join Washington's plan to blockade the Strait of Hormuz, saying they would not be drawn into the conflict. Instead, Britain and France are planning to co-host a summit this week, aimed at restoring the freedom of navigation in the waterway. North Korea said it test-fired strategic cruise missiles and anti-warship missiles from its naval destroyer. Its state media released photos of leader Kim Jong-un observing the launches, where he reportedly said recent developments have boosted the regime's military readiness for strategic action. Hello and thanks for joining us on Arirang News. U.S. President Donald Trump has confirmed a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, warning Iran against any military approach. Meanwhile, the Iranian president said the U.S. was the reason weekend talks failed and that the blockade will have global repercussions. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
The U.S. officially said that it began blocking ships from entering or exiting Iranian ports in the Strait of Hormuz at 10 a.m. Monday U.S. Eastern Time. Speaking to reporters at the White House, U.S. President Donald Trump confirmed the blockade and claimed that Iran wants to make a peace deal very badly, adding that Iran will never have a nuclear weapon.
Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. And we agreed to a lot of things, but they didn't agree to that. And I think they will agree to it. I'm almost sure of it. In fact, I am sure of it. If they don't agree, there's no deal. There'll never be a deal.
According to the Wall Street Journal, the U.S. military deployed more than 15 naval vessels to the region for the operation. Writing on Truth Social, Trump said the U.S. military had obliterated 158 Iranian ships and that any Iranian fast attack ships that go near a U.S. maritime blockade zone would be eliminated. Meanwhile, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said that unreasonable demands from the U.S. blocked agreement during talks at the weekend. In a phone call with French President Emmanuel Macron on Monday, he said Tehran had clearly outlined the conditions for the ceasefire and remained committed to them. He further claimed that Iran will continue negotiations only within the framework of international law. Regarding Washington's blockade of Iranian ports along the Strait of Hormuz, Pezeshkian warned that actions that threaten the strait will have widespread global repercussions. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Over in Europe, NATO allies are refusing to back U.S. President Donald Trump's plan to blockade the Strait of Hormuz, deepening divisions within the alliance after failed talks with Iran. Britain and France say they will instead pursue diplomatic efforts to restore navigation, as the United Nations calls for continued dialogue and respect for international law. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
NATO allies are refusing to join U.S. President Donald Trump's plan to blockade the Strait of Hormuz, signaling they will only intervene after active fighting ends, a move that could deepen tensions within the alliance. The announcement comes after weekend talks failed to resolve the 6-week conflict with Iran. Trump said the U.S. military would work with partners to block all maritime traffic through the critical waterway, which handles roughly a fifth of global oil supplies. However, key NATO members, including Britain and France, pushed back, saying they would not participate in the blockade. Instead, they are preparing a separate initiative to reopen the strait and ensure safe navigation once hostilities subside. Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer said the UK and France will co-host talks this week aimed at restoring freedom of navigation in the strait.
And, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm today that together with President Macron, I will convene a summit of leaders this week to drive forward the international effort we have built in recent weeks, bringing together dozens of countries to ensure freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz.
He stressed that the talks will focus mainly on diplomatic efforts to bring pressure to bear for a negotiated end to the conflict and for the strait to be opened, and military planning to provide assurance to shipping as soon as a stable environment can be established. French President Emmanuel Macron also announced plans for a multinational mission to coordinate naval escorts and establish rules for safe passage through the waterway. At the United Nations, Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for a continued dialogue between the United States and Iran following talks in Islamabad that ended without agreement. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said on Monday that the recent discussions were a positive step toward renewed diplomacy despite ongoing differences.
Given the deeply rooted differences, an agreement cannot be reached overnight, and the Secretary General calls on the talks to continue constructively in order for an agreement to be reached.
He also urged all sides to respect ceasefire efforts and uphold international law, including the principle of freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung says South Korea must maintain its emergency response system following the breakdown of peace talks between the United States and Iran. Chairing a cabinet meeting this morning, Lee warned that high oil prices and disruptions to global energy and raw material supplies are likely to persist. He called for the swift implementation of the roughly $17 billion supplementary budget to support people's livelihoods. The government plans to begin distributing cash handouts to the bottom 70% of income earners starting April 27th. He also urged the parties to the Middle East conflict to take what he called a brave step toward peace based on universal human rights and the lessons of history. The U.S. blockade on Iranian ports is sending shockwaves through South Korea's economy. Heavily reliant on Middle Eastern crude, domestic industries face an imminent supply cliff and surging costs as the government rushes to respond. Our economic correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
The United States is set to enforce a total maritime blockade on all Iranian ports starting Monday, which could cripple South Korea's core industries. With Middle Eastern crude accounting for 70% of imports, domestic refiners and petrochemical companies face an imminent supply cliff. Domestic economists point out that the blockade adds a complex diplomatic and economic burden on Seoul.
While this should be resolved through negotiations with Iran, the Trump administration's blockade of Hormuz has created a new dilemma, especially given Washington's current unfavorable view of Seoul. We now have the Trump risk compounding our existing problems, making the situation progressively worse.
The Minister of Trade, Industry and Resources Kim Jong-kwan conducted emergency inspections on Monday at 4 petrochemical manufacturing facilities. To prevent supply chain disruptions in essential sectors, the government is allocating 674.4 billion won from a supplementary budget passed last week to subsidize the import of naphtha from non-Middle Eastern regions. The ministry is also drafting emergency regulations to ban the hoarding of raw petrochemical materials. However, global market analysts warn the ripple effects will be severe across the region's major economies.
So you're going to see, especially markets like in Japan, in Korea, in India, those markets are going to be hit hard, especially sectors that heavily rely on oil, right? So oil transportation, sectors such as airlines, such as transportation, consumer cyclicals, chemicals, those sectors are going to be hit the hardest.
The domestic aviation sector is already bracing for the shock. For airlines where fuel constitutes a significant portion of operating budgets, the financial impact is severe. The mounting strain is forcing low-cost carriers into emergency measures. T-Way Air announced on Monday it is accepting applications for voluntary unpaid leave from its cabin crew for May and June. Global freight rates are climbing steadily, placing severe financial strain on export-driven small and medium-sized enterprises. Unlike large corporations, SMEs rely heavily on spot contracts, leaving them fully exposed to surging logistics costs. 김도현, Arirang News.
And exports of South Korea's ICT products surged to a record in March, breaking above the $40 billion mark for the first time, driven by strong AI and chip demand. Data released this morning by the Ministry of Science and ICT showed $43.51 billion of ICT exports in March, up 112% from a year earlier. The figure rose by about $10 billion from February, marking a 14th consecutive month of growth. Semiconductor exports led the gain, surpassing $30 billion for the first time. Mobile phones and computers saw double-digit growth, while displays and telecom equipment posted declines. This led to an ICT trade surplus of $27.36 billion, also a record for a second consecutive month. North Korea over the weekend test-fired strategic cruise missiles and anti-warship missiles from its 5,000-ton class destroyer, Choe Hyon. The North Korean Central News Agency on Tuesday released photos of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un observing the missile launches, where he reportedly said that recent achievements in defense science have qualitatively boosted the regime's military readiness for strategic action. He further called for steady and unlimited development of a powerful and reliable nuclear war deterrent. Kim had previously observed strategic cruise missile tests from the Choe Hyon on March 4th and 10th. U.S. President Donald Trump has nominated former Korean-American Congresswoman Michelle Park Steele as the next U.S. ambassador to South Korea. According to a presidential nomination document released on Monday, Steele, a former two-term Republican lawmaker from California, is tapped to take on the role as Seoul and Washington navigate key issues. The ambassador post in Seoul has remained vacant since Philip Goldberg departed in January last year. Steele previously served on the President's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders during Trump's first term. She was elected to the House in 2020, re-elected in 2022, but lost her seat in last year's general election. South Korea's parliament wrapped up its three-day interpellation session on Monday, with the final round of questioning centered on education, society, and cultural affairs. Our Buniran has the details.
The National Assembly convened on Monday afternoon for the final day of its three-day interpellation session, with lawmakers turning their focus to education, society, and cultural affairs. Prime Minister Kim Min-seok joined key cabinet members, including the Ministers of Justice, Interior, and Education, for a wide-ranging round of questioning that touched on several sensitive issues. Political tensions ran high as lawmakers clashed over a series of controversies ahead of the June 3rd local elections. At the heart of the controversy were allegations of prosecutorial misconduct and a previous decision not to indict a mayoral candidate in Busan over alleged illicit payments. Lawmakers pressed ministers on concerns about fairness and potential political bias in investigations, to which they pledged to tighten standards.
Going forward, we'll make sure this doesn't happen again by handling things more fairly and thoroughly, especially in election-related cases, under stricter standards.
But the session wasn't solely consumed by political disputes. Lawmakers also turned their attention to issues closer to home for many South Koreans, such as education policy. Education Minister Choe Hyon said a restricted phone for students designed for learning use could be a meaningful way to address excessive smartphone use among younger children, but several factors such as broad social consensus would be needed before moving forward. He also highlighted plans to promote reading from an early age.
We plan to designate pilot institutions focused on reading, strengthen teachers' capabilities in reading education, and expand programs linked with libraries to help foster a reading culture from early childhood.
With both sides using the session to sharpen their positions, the day's proceedings carried added weight, not only as a check on government policy, but as a signal of where the political battle lines will be drawn ahead. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
A reservoir in the city of Osan, Gyeonggi-do Province has been transformed into a waterfront attraction, featuring vibrant lights and music. A striking fountain was recently unveiled to the public. Our Choe Hyon reports.
Colorful shoots of water rise energetically from the surface of a reservoir. They dance and sway, changing shape in perfect sync with upbeat K-pop rhythms. This is Seorang Reservoir musical fountain in Osan being shown to the public for the first time. Spanning 57 meters in length, the fountain boasts an overwhelming presence, launching columns of water up to 100 meters into the air. The project also completed a 2.1-kilometer circular walking trail that goes around the reservoir by connecting previously severed sections. Local residents are thrilled to witness the birth of a waterfront park.
I always wished for a park like this around here. I am happy that after 8 years, such a beautiful lake park has finally been created.
Osan City plans to properly finish the fountain by the end of this month. By linking the park with the nearby Doksansong Fortress, the city aims to nurture the area into a premier healing landmark for the southern Gyeonggi-do Province area. 차윤경, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. Hezbollah's leader on Monday publicly demanded that Lebanon cancel direct talks with Israel. The talks scheduled for Tuesday in Washington would be the first such face-to-face negotiations between the two countries in decades. Naim Qassem made the televised appeal, calling the meeting a free concession to Israel and the United States. Meanwhile, fierce fighting rages in the southern Lebanese town of Bint Jabal, where Israeli forces encircled the area and Hezbollah fighters launched rockets, artillery, and drones. Israel's military said its troops killed more than 100 Hezbollah fighters in the town and surrounding areas. President Donald Trump on Monday refused to apologize to Pope Leo XIV after launching a public attack on the Catholic Church's leader over his opposition to the U.S. war in Iran. Trump criticized the Pope on social media on Sunday, calling him weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy. Then posted an AI-generated image depicting himself as a Jesus-like figure laying hands on a sick man. Following a backlash, the image was deleted on Monday, and Trump told reporters it was meant to show him as a doctor, not as Jesus. Pope Leo on Monday said we'll continue speaking out loudly against war. 2 days before tax day in the U.S., President Donald Trump on Monday had 2 bags of McDonald's food delivered to the Oval Office by a DoorDash driver, then handed her a $100 tip on camera to promote his administration's tax cut on tips. Driver Sharon Simmons from Arkansas told Trump the policy had put $11,000 back in her pocket as her husband battled cancer. When a reporter asked if the White House were good tippers, Trump reached into his pocket and handed her the $100 bill. Colombia on Monday ordered the killing of up to 80 hippos. The hippos are the wild descendants of animals drug lord Pablo Escobar illegally imported decades ago. They have spread across the country, threatening villagers and wiping out native species. Colombia's environment minister did not say when the culling would begin. Colombia is the only country outside Africa with a wild hippo population. Choe Hyon, Arirang News.
It may have have felt like summer arrived early yesterday and today brings more of the same, especially across western regions. Highs in Seoul will climb to around 27 degrees Celsius this afternoon, and that's more than a month ahead of schedule. But beware of that classic spring twist, warm days and cooler evenings. The central regions will gradually clear this afternoon after a cloudy start, while the southern regions remain mostly overcast. Rain has already begun on Jeju Island and will spread to the southern coast later today. In fact, Jeju could see up to 30 millimeters of rainfall into Wednesday. Unlike the summer warmth in the west, the east stays cooler. Gwangju will be getting up to 26 degrees Celsius, but Gyeongju will just get up to 16 degrees this afternoon. The early summer warmth continues through the week, especially in western regions. Then another band of rain expected on Friday in the southern regions and Jeju, and that should briefly ease the heat.
That's all we have for today's noon edition of Arirang News. Thank you for watching. We'll be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Stay tuned.
지금도 너무 생생한데 요즘도 너무 힘들어서 지치거나 피곤할 때 항상 이걸 찾게 되는 것 같아요. 저는 전 태권도 국가대표, 현재는 태권도 해설위원을 하고 있는 이대훈이라고 합니다. 자체가 몸보신할 때 먹는다라는 느낌을 어릴 때는 못 받았었어요. 왜냐하면 운동을 그렇게 막 힘들게 안 했기 때문에. 근데 중학교 형들이랑 같이 운동을 시작할 때 첫 회식이 삼계탕이었었어요. 제가 가장 강력한 인상을 받았던 거는 그 숟가락이랑 젓가락도 임금님이 사용할 법한 그 노쇠 삼계탕은 뭔가 궁중 요리 같은 느낌을 받았어요. 그래서 그때 이후로 되게 특별한 날, 힘들거나 힘을 내야 되는 상황이 오면 삼계탕을 좀 찾아 먹게 되는 것 같아요. 찹쌀을 많이 넣는 게 좋은 것 같아요. 그 국물하고 같이 먹을 때 그게 저는 가장 좋았었거든요. 가장 중요한 게 삼계탕에서는 그 한약재, 큰 막 오갑기 같은 이만한 나무 같은 것도 막 들어가고 하잖아요. 그게 딱 있으면은 아, 뭔가 좋은 약재가 하나 더 들어갔구나, 몸보신이 더 되겠구나 라는 생각이 더 들게 된 것 같아요. 그리고 이제 찹쌀이랑 같이 들어갈 밤이라던가 대추, 통마늘 이거를 잘 닭 배에다가 넣어서 이렇게 뭐 이쑤시개 같은 걸로 이렇게 살짝 이렇게 잘 꿰매주고 다리를 이제 이렇게 앞바다리를 잘 만들어줘야지 그렇게 좀 이쁘게. 닭이 반신욕하듯이 싹 들어가야지 이제 닭도 편안하게 익을 수 있으니까요. 고기가 부드러워야지 맛있으니까 좀 오랫동안 끓여서 전체적인 살을 좀 부드럽게. 저 일단 매운 고추는 별로 안 좋아해서 저는 오이고추 좋아하거든요. 오이고추 쌈장 많이 찍어서 딱 먹으면은 이제 고기랑 이제 입안에서 딱 어우러지는 맛이 그게 최고 맛있죠. 삼계탕이 익을 때 그 보글보글 하면서 이 공기방울이 생기잖아요. 계속 뚝배기 안 나오면 이 보글보글함이 없거든요. 음식도 간 만든 게 맛있는데 이거는 지금도 만들고 있는 느낌이 들기 때문에 어릴 때도 그랬는데 그 빗소리 들으면 마음이 편안해지는 것처럼 힘들고 지친 게 싹 사라지는 느낌이 들거든요. 항상 그 보글보글 소리가 마음을 편안하게 해주고 전쟁터에서 뭔가 쉬는 곳으로 왔구나라는 느낌을 딱 주는 것 같아요. 특히 삼계탕은 어떻게 하면은 이 먹는 사람이 더 힘을 낼까 하는 마음에 만드는 요리이기 때문에 정성이 더 많이 들어가게 되는 것 같아요. 그렇기 때문에 더 맛난 거겠죠.